Thank you all for joining us for this webinar series that's been facilitated by the IARPIC. And I guess I just want to make a few introductory comments about this series of workshops that took place in 2016. A group of collaborative of 5 institutions took on this enterprise, I guess I'll call it, of looking and re-envisioning Arctic social sciences in general, and specifically to speak with the Arctic Social Sciences program. It had been almost 2 decades since the Arctic Social Sciences program had really been created. And I wanted to have advice from the community. NSF talks about being ground up. And so we wanted to talk with the social science community about where they saw social sciences in the Arctic specifically was going. More and more interdisciplinary science, more and more Indigenous scholarship was coming forward, both into the program and in general being done in the Arctic. And so this group of 5 institutions came to the program and proposed the series of 6 workshops. And you have 4 representatives here of the different institutions that did that. And so basically I'm going to turn this over to them, and then in the end, if anybody has any questions specifically for me as the program director of the Arctic Social Sciences program at NSF, then I'm happy to take them. And please be patient with me. I'm not as familiar with Zoom as I probably should be vis-a-vis recognizing chats, etc. So I may get some assistance from others more computer savvy who are on this call than myself. So thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to the presentation as well.
Great, I think that is my call to take over. So I will share my screen. And hopefully you are all seeing my PowerPoint. Can someone tell me they can see my PowerPoint?
Yep, we see it.
Perfect.
By the way,
Thank
you might want to introduce yourself.
Yes, I will do that now. So good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone for coming, no matter where you are. Thanks for joining us. My name is Colleen Stryker. I'm a member of the steering committee that Anna just mentioned. I'm a research scientist at the National Snow and Ice Data Center. And so myself, Shelby Anderson, and Andre Petrov, who are on the call right now, will be presenting on the Arctic Horizons process that Anna briefly just introduced on behalf of the entire steering committee that you can see listed on this front side here. To give you a general overview of where we're going, I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about the kind of in-depth process that the Arctic Horizons project took to really get feedback from the wider community. Then Andre will take over and talk about background and connections to the wider kind of Arctic research and international research, Arctic research community as well. And then Shelby will take over and talk about our findings and our results. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So again, I'll be talking to you a little bit about the Arctic Horizons process. You can see the URL for the Arctic Horizons website here. Aaron Presnell of the Jefferies Institute put together a really nice website, and you can actually find much of the information that we'll be talking about over the next half hour or so on that website as well. So you're more than welcome to go to that, check it out, and find some of the information on the Arctic Horizons project there too. So Anna briefly touched upon the mission for the Arctic Horizons process, but you can see it up here now. And essentially it is to bring together members of the Arctic social sciences and Indigenous communities to reassess the goals, potentials, and needs of these diverse communities and the Arctic Social Sciences program within the context of a rapidly changing North. So how exactly did we do this? First, we organized, developed, and conducted 6 regional and interdisciplinary workshops. These workshops were designed to bring in people from multiple different backgrounds, disciplines, fields, geographic locations, Indigenous participation, and various other stakeholders that may have a say in what the future of the Arctic Social Sciences program should look like. These workshops were designed to design and support a broad and inclusive discussion of things like research priorities, the scope of the Arctic Social Sciences program, and what the mission of this program really should be. Finally, coming out of those kind of 2 activities, the steering committee right now is finalizing a first draft of the final report that is synthesizing these findings on things like the vision, the scope, the things that I just mentioned on what the future of the Arctic Social Sciences program really should be. So here you see a schematic of how the steering committee structured the Arctic Horizon process. So you can see at the top here in the top center, the National Steering Committee, the members of which you saw on the first slide. The steering committee really provided overall guidance on the project. They recruited participants for workshop. They came up with an engagement strategy to really how we should best engage the community to get the best quality and quantity as well of feedback on this process. They coordinated and planned meetings, and then we started coming up with the final report as well. Importantly, the steering committee also had an advisory board, which provided oversight in a couple of different ways. So the advisory board members often reviewed and edited sets of questions for each of the workshops that the steering committee organized. The advisory board will be providing pretty extensive comments on the final report that we will be sending out for comment in a few weeks. And they suggested things like key literature and reports that workshop attendees should be reading before in preparation for the workshops. So you can see here in the middle, we had a number of in-person venues to supply feedback. And so in the middle here, you see 5 of our workshops here. So one in Portland, one in Fairbanks, Juneau, Cedar Falls, and Providence. And I'll talk a little bit more about what these workshops touched upon in the next couple of slides. In addition to those workshops, there were 4 town hall forums tested or used to really get feedback from the community. So one was the Alaska Anthropological Association, one was Arctic Science Summit Week in 2016, one was the Association of American Geographers, and then most recently the International Congress of Arctic Social Sciences that was in June in Umeå, Sweden. So these 9 venues really provided the meat of people to in person provide a lot of feedback on what they thought the future of the Arctic Social Sciences program should look like. Now, it wasn't possible to bring everyone that might want to have a say in the future of Arctic Social Sciences to every meeting. Timing and scheduling and budget just wouldn't allow for that. So we also wanted to make sure that there was a pretty wide online presence for the Arctic Horizons process. So you see that on the left here. Not only the Arctic Horizons website that I mentioned in the first couple of slides has a number of blogs to solicit some feedback and comments from the community, but also 2 social media venues too. So you see the Facebook page and the Twitter handle there as well, in which we had a couple of people providing some feedback as we were live tweeting meetings and things like that. So these 3 venues, both the social media, the workshops, and the town hall forums, all came together in the input analysis that has been going on by the steering committee for the past few months, which is now being put into a final report, which should be done, the first draft should be done in the next couple of weeks or so, and we'll be soliciting comments from the wider community on that report as well. So specifically the workshops. So workshop 1 you see here was held at Portland State. The focus of this was integrating past, present, and future human ecodynamics in Arctic social science research. You can imagine this is a major push in research going on in Arctic social sciences right now. So that research or that workshop really focused on that research topic. Workshop 2 was held in Fairbanks, and this was probably the most innovative, really cool workshop as a part of the Arctic Horizons process, really focusing on Indigenous scholarship in the North, decolonizing methods, models, and practices in social science research, and focusing on how Indigenous people can take a broader and wider role in Arctic social science research. Workshop 3 was held in Juneau, titled Uninhibited Synergies, Sciences, Humanities, Engineering at the Nexus in Arctic Research. So once again, we're going very transdisciplinary here and seeing how the humanities and the arts and engineering really feeds into the Arctic Social Sciences program as well. So the last 2 workshops, and there was a 6th and final synthesis workshop among the steering committee to really synthesize what was going on here. But workshop 4 was held in Cedar Falls, focused on integrating theories, data, and methods to ascertain local, national, and international relevance. So this workshop really focused on how Arctic Social Sciences program at the National Science Foundation is interacting with various other Arctic research programs internationally and within the United States as well as really focusing on issues of data information being produced by the Arctic Social Sciences program too. And then finally, workshop 5 was held in Providence and thinking about integrating interdisciplinary, natural, and social scientific research for policy development. So we have a few figures on attendees here. So here are the 5 workshops that I just mentioned. You'll see that the total number of participants here in the middle of each circle, and then the gender split for each meeting. So you can see that we had a really nice gender split of people who identified as men and women at each of the workshops. And here is a figure of from 1990 to 2016 on who is actually receiving grants from the Arctic Social Sciences program. And so this program has funded 741 awards since 1990, investing more than $60 million in the advancement of Arctic science. So as you can imagine, these projects are funding anything from archaeology to economics, linguistics, geography, indigenous leadership, and scholarship. So in this figure, you have an idea of where these grants are going to. This figure breaks down that figure from before by decade. So you can see how the Arctic Social Sciences has grown over the past 26 years or so, and where again these grants are going. So it's really kind of nice to see a relatively light blues here are getting much more darker over time to really support this important research. And finally, our colleagues at the Jefferson Institute did a keyword search of public abstracts from awards from the Arctic Social Sciences program from the 1990s in red here, and then those from the 2010s, so the last 6 years or so in green. So you get an idea of what keywords and how they're changing. So you can see things like the word indigenous being used over something like native. Climate change, environmental change are growing quite a bit, but you can see things like anything related to Russia are decreasing quite a bit over time as well. So this gives you an idea of where the focus of the Arctic Social Sciences program focus has changed throughout its history. So with that, I will hand it over to Andre and I'll stop sharing.
Okay, okay, let's see. How do I do that? Am I doing good?
Andre, we're having the issue with the flashing screen again. Can you try stop sharing and resharing? Oh, okay, now it worked.
Are we good?
Wait,
all right,
now it's back.
So my name is Andre Petrov, and of course I've been part of Arctic Horizons from very inception, and I was the lead on the Cedar Falls workshop that kind of looked at the international context of what we're doing. Of course, Arctic social sciences in the United States don't exist in isolation from the rest of the world, and I think it's important to make sure where we connect and what we share. With
Andre, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're having the flashing screen issue. Can you try stopping sharing again? And reshare.
All right. Is it okay now?
No, it's still doing the same issue. Maybe, Colleen, would you mind sharing the presentation? You have the same one, right?
Yes, I'm happy. Andre, if you want, I can share the presentation and you can just tell me when to move on to the next slide.
It just worked a few minutes ago, right?
I know it did. Okay, and another comment that if you could speak up a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, so is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, so Colleen, please, next slide. So there are several important institutional developments that Arctic social sciences around the world and the United States experienced in the last 20 years since the process of looking into the goals of Arctic social sciences program was accomplished in 1999. That includes several milestones that I mentioned here, such as participation in IPY, establishment of our professional organizations, such as International Arctic Social Science Association, as well as the growing role of social scientists in the International Arctic Science Committee, especially the working group, IASC Social and Human Sciences Working Group. And then, of course, an explicit recognition of the role of the social scientists in the Arctic Council. It's always been a part of the Sustainable Development Working Group, but now specifically, of course, the inception of the Social, Economic, and Cultural Expert Group and in that working group of the Arctic Council is an important element of bringing up social sciences expertise to the policymakers. If you can show the next slide, please. So here we quickly outline the basic Arctic social sciences events that sort of made a difference in the last decade. So just to kind of show that we are not just looking back at what we've done, but we're really planning something that is resulting from tremendous growth in the last 30, almost 30 years, right? So here you see this important event that some of them I already mentioned. International Polar Year, of course, was transformational for recognition of the role and the importance of Arctic social sciences, both in the United States and in the world. There were about 200 projects that had social sciences contact under an IPY. Social scientists, and specifically the Arctic Social Sciences Program at NSF, played an important role in conceiving and executing the International Polar Year. And that's in some ways elevated the profile of Arctic social sciences within the broader polar scientific community. Of course, another part that I should mention, since I am the new president of IASA, is that the role of IASA. Now we actually count for about 700 members, which is doubled since 10 years ago. And that's also characterizes the growing role of social scientists in the overall scientific community. Another important processes in which social scientists were involved in a growing manner. At first was International Conference on Arctic Research Planning, Archive 2 in 2005, when a couple of reports that it produced were led by social scientists, but of course, ICARP 3 that just wrapped up in 2015 actually, in fact, had a significant contribution from Arctic social scientists. And as I mentioned in a few minutes, some of the priorities that it identified through 2025 actually speak directly to social sciences. Next slide, please. So here we took some graphs from the recent report by the University of the Arctic that looked at general scholarship and funding in Arctic sciences to just emphasize that to date, Arctic social sciences is a small fraction of all Arctic funding, and although we're producing an increasing number of publications. So the chart, the bar chart shows us, you know, closer to the end of it, studies in human society, education. These are some things, yes, things that social scientists are doing. They are really, as you can see, a small fraction of funding. On the pie chart, you see that social sciences produce about 7% of cited scientific publications. And I have to tell you that it's actually been growing. So in the early 2000s, we were about 3%. Now we're about 7 or even 8%. So we actually substantially increased our role. Next slide, please. This slide also characterizes the proportion of publications and the number of publications. The social sciences are in the bright purple, and they are, as you could see, right, the most rapidly, alongside with medicine, increasing both in numbers and in proportion of total Arctic scholarship. Next slide, please. And that is especially interesting and important is that Arctic research, including social sciences, is increasingly international, and international collaboration is actually more important to this type of research than to other types of research. As you can see, the green line is world, just all publications, and the red line is Arctic research. So we are way ahead of the rest of the non-Arctic, I guess, science in terms of being collaborative. Next slide, please. The last slide from that report was fascinating to me because it shows social sciences in the bottom right, and it basically shows us the growth of both publications and proportion of the world social sciences publications, right? You can see, so we were growing very rapidly, and if you briefly look just above social science on natural science, you can see that while they were also growing, their proportion in the rest of the natural sciences scholarship actually declined, while Arctic social science is not only growing, but actually making more impact by having a larger share of publications and overall social sciences family, which is, I think, is important for advancing what we try to do in the future. Okay, next slide, please. So here we, in the final report that everybody will see in a few weeks, I guess, contains an analysis of other documents that we built our results upon and our conclusions of what would be the priorities for the next few years. So first of all, National Science Foundation has been producing a number of very important reports and sort of policy documents that really define what polar science is going to look like in the next 10 to 20 years. Of course, the most recent NSF Big Ideas report explicitly names navigating the new Arctic as one of the 10 big ideas to which NSF is prepared to invest and support. And that's, of course, very positive, because Arctic social sciences are definitely included. And one of the 3 research questions that is proposed under that big idea is actually social sciences question that relates to communities, adaptation, and the relationship with climate change and social changes. So that's an important part of that here. So the other key document that we also extensively looked at is the Arctic and Anthropocene, of course, a 2014 publication that defines differently what Arctic what type of Arctic, I guess, we're dealing with in the 21st century. And that includes a number of important elements that relate directly to social sciences priorities, such as looking into community futures, right? And understanding the heritage and lost heritage and potentially lost heritage, and what should be done to preserve and maintain our understanding of both environment and societies from the past. It's, of course, connections between Arctic and the rest of the world, and its importance to development of the Arctic, and some other important things that really set us against the backdrop of the new approach to which we look at Arctic with, which is Arctic as in the new geological and the new social and economic era, really. Then in the United States, as we all know, there are other agencies that set up priorities for research. Of course, the U.S. Arctic Research Commission has been instrumental in setting them up in the last since 1984, when it was established. The 2 goals from the recent 2016-17 goals, of course, look at human health and culture and community resilience. And this transpired into recently approved plan for this organization that provided us with the opportunity to share our results with you. The Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee has approved this research plan last year that contains several focal areas for Arctic social sciences, which includes enhance the understanding of health determinants and well-being in the Arctic, strengthening coastal community resilience, and of course, enhance frameworks for environmental intelligence, gathering, interpretation, and sharing. So all of them are feeding to what you will hear in the end of this presentation, that would be what we think Arctic Social Sciences program should be focusing. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'm wrapping up pretty soon. So now, of course, the international component, as Anna said, Arctic Horizons has been conceived and designed as the primarily conversation with US scholars. However, we would not shy away from discussions with our international colleagues at the town halls. It mostly was US focused. However, in the last few months, we started to opening it up and connecting to our international colleagues. Now, there are a number of organizations and important associations that set up research priority of Arctic social scientists. IASA, of course, is not really doing that explicitly. However, at the last meeting that Colleen mentioned, it was very strongly emphasized that indigenous scholarship and knowledge co-production should be one of the focal areas for IASA next 3 years term, as well as engaging of social science with humanities and continued and expanded international cooperation. Another important part, as I mentioned already, is ICARP 3, which is, of course, been involving Arctic social scientists, and it has a very specific area that's based on our input is vulnerability and resilience of Arctic environments and societies and sustainable development. And then there are a number of goals under that that are very important for us in this Arctic Horizons process. Arctic Human Development Report also emphasized important things like Arctic youth, for example, and gender dimensions that are, of course, also entering into our sphere of interest, the urbanization processes and cities in the Arctic that, of course, Arctic Social Sciences program has been pioneering in studying and funding research. So, so these are important things that's sort of fed us with information from international and national sources. Of course, IAS Social and Human Sciences Working Group has its own priorities that also deal with well-being and health, as well as with developing interactions with natural scientists, with, of course, another important area in which Arctic Social Sciences program has been successful, but also need to invest more from the all NSF programs to ensure that we have truly integrative and interdisciplinary scholarship. Next slide. Yeah, so I think with that, I allow the next speaker. Is she? Yeah, Shelby's right here. So thank you.
Okay, let me just.
Thank you, Colleen.
I'm just sharing my screen. And oops. I had it all set up. Sorry, everyone, just a little, now it's not working now that we're actually doing the webinar.
Well, we can always have Colleen step in again.
Sorry, Colleen.
Do you want me to share mine, Shelby? I can do that.
Sure, let's do that so people don't have to wait.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll introduce myself just quickly. I'm Shelby Anderson. I am an archaeologist and an assistant professor at Portland State University. And I co-organized the Portland State Workshop with my colleagues here, Virginia Butler and Mike Etnier, and have been involved in Arctic Horizons since the beginning. So I'm going to take it away with some of our results and outcomes. So while each workshop had a specific theme or topic, we're going to focus on 3 questions that we asked all the participants at all the workshops. And they were, the first question was about the changing Arctic. What are the most important changes affecting the Arctic now and in the coming decades? What about changes in Arctic social sciences? How has Arctic social science changed over the last 20 years? And why do these changes matter to the social sciences, to the broader scientific community, and to society at large? And the third question was about broader impacts in the future of Arctic social science. In what ways does Arctic social science influence the field of social science more broadly? What contributions can and should we continue to make, and what new contributions have we made, or do we have the potential to make in the future? And what key questions remain unanswered in the Arctic that require concerted research effort in the next 10 to 15 years? Next slide, please. So through our discussions of these questions at all of the topics, we identified what our community considers key drivers of Arctic change that affect Arctic social science research. One of the biggest or most frequently discussed topic was climate change, with attendant changes in resource access, impacts and opportunities for contemporary communities, and it has impacts on the archaeological record as well. The climate change is fast-paced and taking place on wide geographic scales that vary across the Arctic. We've also seen a real change in social media and technology revolution that affects access, connectivity, data collection, management, and sharing, both for communities and for researchers. It's changed the way that people connect with each other and the ways that researchers could capture and understand human connections and relationships. Globalization has percolated into local and regional affairs in a variety of ways. The Arctic is increasingly coming into public view and that of policymakers. And this, of course, has implications for social science research. There have been dramatic changes in the international situation, the geopolitical environment, and circumpolar politics. In recent years, policymakers at both the international and the national scale see the Arctic as a region of economic, military, and political significance, with implications for new scales of governance, intervention, and funding for non-social science projects that need social science oversight or study to understand their impacts and potential. Some of these changes have come about due to elevated interest in Arctic resources and a consequent rapid pace of change in terms of territorial claim staking by local, provincial, or state, national, and transnational political organizations, as well as corporate entities. So we've seen significant changes in northern governance and political frameworks. There's a remilitarization of the Arctic following demilitarization in the 1990s. Arctic youth conditions are changing dramatically. The roles and desires of Arctic youth are quickly changing, as are gender definitions, gender roles, and diversity in the Arctic. We've seen significant changes in human migration patterns in the Arctic, and a lack of meaningful change in the well-being and health of people in small Arctic communities. There are also emerging infrastructure changes and challenges. And of course, all these things intersect each other in many interesting ways. Next slide, please. So with those changes in the Arctic, we've seen some significant changes and trends in Arctic social science research over the last 20 years. Since the last research prioritization effort in 1999, some of the themes identified then are still viable, but at the same time, the social sciences has expanded in response to challenges and opportunities brought about by Arctic change. A lot of this has been spurred by the Arctic Social Sciences Program priorities and by efforts of Indigenous scholars. Arctic social science research has become increasingly collaborative and community-driven. There was an emphasis in the ARCIS 1999 recommendations to the Arctic Social Science Program on education and outreach to bring Arctic youth and community members into research teams. And as a result, we've seen the research capacity of Indigenous communities increase dramatically. And this has led to new collaborations and insights for everyone involved in social science research. These include an emphasis on repatriation of knowledge, artifacts, and data to communities in the North. We're seeing a really rapid decolonization of science in the North, perhaps more so than anywhere else in the world, and an increase in applied social science research due to sustained funding support. It's been really important for the development of that area of social science research. Also an increase in inter and multi and transdisciplinary research in the North. Next slide, please. We also felt that the Arctic social science is advancing social science methodologies and theory more broadly through our work in the Arctic. We're making major contributions to how we think about knowledge co-production. It's become a central epistemological paradigm in the North, and we're influencing social science more broadly with our work in the North. This includes focusing on the decolonization of science. We also see understandings between non-Indigenous researchers and Indigenous communities about rights to heritage resources evolving in the Arctic and becoming clearer and more productive. There's a big shift to inter and transdisciplinary and mixed methods research that is rooted in methods from multiple subdisciplines, including the arts and humanities. The line between science and humanities research is blurred, and scholars are using epistemologies from the humanities and arts to broaden our understanding of Arctic social, cultural, and natural systems in a holistic way. We've made major advances in social data collection, curation, and information sovereignty. More social science research is now community-driven, place-based, and there's a growing emphasis on the repatriation of knowledge. We've seen significant transformations in the relationships between social and natural research, natural science research in the Arctic, expanding social natural science partnerships and archaeological research, sustainability sciences, indicators development, socio-ecological systems, and so on. A lot of that kind of convergent research taking place in the Arctic. There have been some major technological changes in instrumentation, such as developments in DNA studies, ancient isotopes, geospatial technology. These changes have been especially transformative for archaeology, for planning, and for human geography. A lot of these, this evolution in Arctic social sciences was brought about by the emergence and strengthening of professional organizations for Arctic social sciences. Also the International Employee Year, as Andre already mentioned, it brought a new level of recognition and relevance to Arctic social science, and also the emergence of the Arctic Social Science Program at NSF. It's provided a forum for diverse perspectives and integrated projects that has really been a major driver in terms of these shifts in Arctic social science research and the ways that we're contributing to social science more broadly. Next slide, Colleen's going to speak for a minute about data.
Thanks, Shelby. So I should also mention that I joined the steering committee a bit later than everyone else. I didn't do all the heavy lifting of organizing meetings and things like that, but I did join the synthesis workshop, the 6th one, to really talk a lot about issues of data and information being produced by the Arctic Social Sciences Program. As many of you know, we're having a huge issue with losing data. There was a recent study released saying that most of the scientific data produced in the 1990s is lost and will never be able to be reused again. So if we want to do any of the research that we've been talking about for the past, half hour, 45 minutes or so, things like broad scale research, something with deep time depth, really being able to do interdisciplinary research, we need to have access to data that have been produced by other people. But as many of you on this call know, that data and information being produced by the Arctic Social Sciences Program is quite a bit different than data being produced in other programs, and that needs to be kind of considered when we're thinking about how to best curate and make these data reusable in the future. So things like the big things are going to be confidentiality of research subjects, privacy, the diversity of social science data being created, anything from GIS data to Excel spreadsheets to videos of interviews in different languages to linguistic analyses and things like that. It's really quite a bit complicated to think about the probably thousands of data structures that could be produced by this program. The other part I also wanted to highlight too is that we've been talking a lot about issues of research sovereignty and co-production of research, and that is coming up a lot with information and data as well, and really thinking critically about who owns the data and information being produced by this program as well, and to really think about moving forward on how to best manage the data and information being produced by the Arctic Social Sciences Program. And Shelby, I will hand it back to you.
Great, thank you. So through our efforts, the research community identified several emerging research themes. These are areas of work that were mentioned multiple times by multiple people at multiple workshops. There are areas of work that the Arctic social science community should and wants to focus on in the next 10 years to meet the changes in the Arctic, the changing needs of communities and of the region itself. These research areas transcend disciplinary boundaries, and they include working on convergent research on socio-ecological systems, studying past and present drivers of change in the North, including climate change, but other types of change as well, demographics of past and present migration, community health and healing and the social aspects of health, food security, youth and gender studies, sustainability and sustainable development, globalization and new colonialism, innovations in data curation, management, sharing, discoverability, and access, and a variety of interdisciplinary research such as archaeology with sociology. Next slide, please. We also identified several critical areas where we need support in Arctic social science research, and these include promoting, supporting, and enacting Indigenous scholarship, including improved support for community and Indigenous community collaborative efforts, decolonized research sovereignty, and knowledge co-production models of research should be supported. We want to make ethics concerning the research and information sovereignty of Arctic Indigenous communities a standard element of research design in this region. Our work transcends what is traditionally understood to be social science, and we should seek support and receive support from international, interdisciplinary, and sources of funding for comparative research. We should seek funding from natural sciences, system science, computational sciences, and other fields. And we really need to expand the number of agencies, foundations, and organizations with incentives to include funding for Arctic social science research in their mandates. We need to expand efforts to mentor the next generation of Northern scholars and to promote equity in Northern research. Address the rapid loss of cultural heritage, including the loss of Indigenous languages and the destruction of archaeological sites through climate change. We need to find a way to prioritize and coordinate our response to climate change impacts to heritage resources. Otherwise, the problem is overwhelming and we will be ineffective. We need to invest in language revitalization programs, invest in data management, maintenance, and services for sharing, discoverability, and access, and seek to balance issues of confidentiality and information sovereignty with the open data movement. We found that the contributions of Arctic social sciences to non-Arctic conversations, journals, and debates often remain less visible than those from social scientists working in other regions, despite some of the trends that Andre discussed earlier in Arctic social science research. So we need to encourage researchers to share methodological innovations, findings, and data developed in Arctic studies with scientists focusing in other regions to widen our impact and our contributions. As a part of that effort, we'd like to see a continued venues to foster participatory discussion of the state of the discipline, continuing Arctic Horizons or other similar processes that bring together a community of scholars and Indigenous community members to talk about the state of our discipline is important. Next slide, please. Some final thoughts. So the Arctic Horizons Project brought together a diverse group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous scholars from across the social sciences. Our goal was to work together to re-envision research priorities for Arctic social sciences for the next 10 years and to make recommendations for funding agencies more broadly. From this work, it is apparent that the Arctic social science community is uniquely positioned to do a couple of things. This includes making crucial contributions to guide and understand change in the North through study of the shifting intersections between people, communities, environments, heritage, policy, infrastructure, and development. We can contribute to policy production around issues of sustainability, climate change response, globalization, militarization, and development. We can inform engineering, natural sciences, and other interdisciplinary collaborations through our research on past and present human experience and knowledge of the built and natural environments of the Arctic. We can work together to empower Indigenous communities in the North through collaborative research and the elevation of Indigenous knowledge and experience in policy discourse. And we can contribute to the present and future needs of people in the North with our work on issues of sustainability, heritage, climate change impacts and response, urban and rural socioeconomic systems and development, community resilience, health and well-being, food security, gender and youth studies. The 21st century Arctic has moved to the forefront of national interest and public perception. At the same time, Arctic communities face rapid socioeconomic, environmental, and geopolitical change. Arctic social science research will continue to be a critical source of knowledge in navigating the new Arctic. And that is everything that we had. Next slide. We are happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you all very much for the presentation. That was a great synthesis of everything that went on in all the workshops in the town halls. So now, since we're down to a few minutes, anybody's welcome to stay. I'm sure the team will stay for a little while longer past the 2:30, but I know we all have things that we need to do. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to watch the chat, but if anybody is currently on the phone that would like to ask a question verbally, I'm gonna ask you all to start first.
Anna, I just want to let everybody know. So you're all on mute right now, and I'm just going to unmute everybody. So if you currently have any loud noise in the background, I'll be able to mute you later, but if you can mute yourself after I unmute you, that would be great. Okay, so in 3, 2, 1. All right. Everybody should be unmuted.
Okay, does anybody on the phone have a question? And then I see there's a question here from Kristen.
Yeah, I could just read the question. So in 2014, there was a group of mostly biophysical scientists and journalists who produced a report called Motivating Research on the Science Communications Front, conveying the nature and impacts of rapid change in ice-dominated Earth systems. And it was the result of a workshop where I felt the Arctic social science was really underrepresented. And so I'm wondering how or whether this group had discussed the social science research needs kind of coming from the biophysical scientists or that are being included in their proposals, such as communication, education, or co-production projects that are discussed in the context of their broader impact sections.
Did I try to answer and other two chime in? So we talked quite a bit about a couple of things that you brought up about the need to engage better. Let's see. Yes, we would like to work with biophysical scientists. We would like to be included in their proposals. We'd like to be part of projects at the beginning rather than the end, and not just part of broader impacts, but as a integral part of the research design. We really, this was something that was said broadly and then articulated really well at the Indigenous Scholars Workshop that I had the chance to attend, where we want to see ourselves out of the broader impacts and into the research design and conceptualization. So I feel like that's one part of what you're asking, and we talked some about how to get attention of other people, and we also talked a lot about things like communication, education, and co-production projects. How we're doing a lot of that kind of work in Arctic social science, but again, we're often brought in at the end of projects to kind of help with something that hasn't been going that well, and so we'd really like to be more involved in doing that earlier on. And we also had some people that really specialize in education. And I mean, I'm an archaeologist. I've done some curriculum development and that kind of stuff, but within Arctic social sciences, we could work more with people who specialize in education, for example. So we talked about that.
Can I add something to what you said, Shelby? It's a good question, Kristen. I think that there's a general misunderstanding on the part by natural and physical scientists, maybe not overall, but certainly we see it frequently, that social scientists are either go-betweens between the natural science community and indigenous communities, or that we should be responsible for the education component in natural science projects. They don't quite make the connection sometimes between the fact that social scientists are scientists with research questions and hypotheses, and they do research. We're not the outreach aspect of anybody else's project. So it's not just bringing social scientists on, but engaging with social science epistemologies and research itself. There are people who are experts in communication and in education projects, and they should be the ones engaged early on as well in the development of whether it's just a natural science disciplinary project or if it is an interdisciplinary project. And there are groups of professionals that do that work wonderfully. And they should be the ones that are engaged, whether they're social scientists or natural scientists or come from an evaluation background or an actual teaching background. And so it's a really good question. And I think it's something that there still remains some confusion on the part of natural and physical scientists in general as to what exactly it is social scientists do. And we obviously need to do more to communicate that. Thanks, Shelby. Really good and good question.
I also want to maybe add that I think the report makes it clear that the time for meaningful collaboration is now, because we sort of talk about it. We have some projects that try it, but I think it is now when we need, as social scientists as well, to understand that that's something we need to be working with natural science. It's not an easy process, but I think that's part of the message here is too.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. Did anybody else on the line who's on the phone have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. This is Betsy Baker from Anchorage, NPRB. Really interested, great presentations, and thank you for this emphasis and focus, which is very helpful to us as well. I'd be curious to hear more about the ethics discussion, and we'll just leave it at that, sort of what initiatives you see that are working, what you anticipate developing. Thank you.
Did you guys want to talk about that?
Yeah, maybe Colleen could talk about data ethics and.
Sure, I can talk about it from the data and information side of things. And so I work for and lead a couple of different initiatives that are really focused on this issue of information and data sovereignty. So one of them is the ALOCA, the Exchange for Local Observations and Knowledge in the Arctic, which partners directly with Indigenous communities to come up with ethical and ways that they want to manage their own Indigenous knowledge. I also lead a project called Data Arc, which is focused on bringing together data from the humanities and archaeology and the environment. And we think a lot about the ethics involved and how these data can be shared. So as a part of that work, I partner closely with a couple of different initiatives going on. One of them is the U.S. Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network. They have a new interest group with the Research Data Alliance. Peter Pulsfer is also on the call, is leading a couple of different initiatives called the Arctic Data Committee and the IARPC Data Subteam. And so we are just a pretty loud voice in those non-social science specific arenas too, and just really making sure that the conversation is out there, that even though there's so much focus on this issue of open data and open access, really putting the focus on ethically open access, which was a term specifically used in the IASC data management kind of statement. You can find that online. It was released in 2013. So there are a couple of different initiatives going on that are actually also really good examples of things going on in that venue too.
And of course, within the Arctic Horizons process, the Cedar Falls workshop was partially focused on that. I mean, with ethics and data ethics specifically.
Betsy, did you have? No, that's very helpful. I am aware of those excellent projects. I think the question we get a lot, and we see a lot of the same concerns, right? That social scientists, the natural scientists don't necessarily see them as part of the research design, and we're beginning to require that more and more. But and clearly the data ethics is a very critical part of ethics. Beyond that framework, so are there other initiatives that that you can either describe or see as having particular potential and promise?
I mean, I don't know if there are any specific issues. I mean, there's lots of issues surrounding community collaboration and co-production and ethics in working with communities. And I think that co-production of knowledge and community participatory-based research is in part good ethical research in the Arctic, creating a new standard for how social science and other science should be done in the Arctic. But in general, the questions really are surrounding human subjects and work with human subjects, and the release of the IRB and human subjects approvals in general for all social science research, which was changed, I think, wasn't the final release last year? I can't remember, in 2016. And so that all obviously affects social science research in general, working in the Arctic. I think that, you know, that is where most social scientists go to look at. But in terms of a specific group that's looking at this, I don't know. And then, of course, there's larger policy efforts in terms of, you know, migration and issues like that, and which are also come down to ethical issues as to how do you make those kinds of decisions, which should be very community collaborative. That creates a different level of ethics. I see Peter has said here, thank you, Peter. IARPC Coastal Resilience CT has an emerging initiative focusing on ethics, starting with a review of the existing protocols. So, Peter, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Thanks, Anna. Just Carolina Behe of Inuit Circumpolar Council is the lead of that group. And so we've started that conversation. There is a lot out there. So I think one of the big challenges is to establish what is appropriate, not just in the Arctic, but we know, you know, there are scale issues going right down to the different communities and so on. So that's the challenge I find we have in our work, is that what applies in one community may be very different in another community that's only 100 kilometers away. So.
It's Martin Jefferies here. If I could add a comment to this discussion. IARPC has a set of principles for the conduct of research in the Arctic, and they are about as old as the NSF Arctic Social Sciences program. And that's because when that program was started, I think it was Tom McGovern played a key role in putting together a working group on behalf of IARPC to develop these principles for the conduct of research in the Arctic. IARPC is now looking at those principles and considering an update in view of their age, and because an awful lot has happened in the Arctic in those 20 years, not the least the role of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous knowledge in science. So Renee Crane at NSF and Roberto Delgado at the National Institute for Mental Health, they are co-leading the working group that's being put together to look again at these principles and update them, modernize them, call it what you will. But it is an important topic, and it's one that IARPC takes very seriously. Thank you.
And if I may add as well, so IASA, the International Arctic Social Science Association, the last meeting we talked about revising and looking into our research principles that IASA also maintains, and maybe also updating them, or at least making more explicit the role of Indigenous scholarship and the Indigenous knowledge in co-production. So we will look at that in the next year, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Martin and Andre. Really important. I really appreciate, Martin, you bringing that up. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Does anybody else have any questions? I just want to say that my email is on the NSF website, or you can go to the arctichorizons.org, I think, and also find contact information, or certainly you can submit through arctichorizons.org. I'm happy to engage with everybody online or anybody online. I just want to remind people, not only do I get an amazing number of emails per day, but it is our spend out time period. So it may take me a couple weeks to get back to you. If you don't hear from me, though, please send me in an email again. I don't diss people on purpose. I try to get to everybody eventually. So don't hesitate to send me an email or give me a call. I see Roberto also posted the IARPC principles and the review and revision process. Thanks, Roberto. That's really great. I think he's out of the country right now, so good for him. Is anything else?
Yes, this is Meredith, and I just wanted to point out what Roberto said, that there will be a discussion of the principles at the Health and Wellbeing Collaboration Team meeting tomorrow. So if anyone's interested, that is there.
Great, thanks. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. And as I said, we'll continue to engage. I do want to let everybody know that we're hoping to continue the Arctic Horizons website for some time to come and continue to do some the process of workshops that feed into this process. So we'll be seeing more throughout the next year, and the document, the draft document itself, will be sent out to the participants and to the community broader for comments. So what comes up in the next few weeks is not the final document by any means. We hope it'll be a living document. I think that was the ultimate decision, but don't hold me to that just in case I'm wrong. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Colleen. Thanks.
Thanks all.